have to present to you today an overview study that I've been working on, looking at both the results of the international horses, the horses that have come through to placings, principally to top 10 placings, but it does account to top 15 placings at international level. Principally, though, I will be looking over the course of what I'll present at those that have gone forward, not specifically just to international placings, but I've actually gone on to meter 40 plus placings. I'm also looking at the Premier Grand Prix classes from 2009 to 2013, and I will be comparing those on a year for year with the National Grand Prix classes of the past season gone out. And I'll also be looking at the young horse classes, the classes that have been in the RDS, the HSI stud book classes, and the classes from Cavan, from the young horse classes from the Indoor Championships in September. So I suppose really the purpose of doing the study for me was to look at, one, to look at the breeding trends of these horses, two, to look at the progression levels that were coming from the young horse classes through into international placings. I also wanted to look at kind of a direct comparison for the years of 2006 to 2013 for the young horse classes themselves, and to look at the impact of the age at which the horses were actually competing, how that reflected in their progression from these classes to international meter 40 plus placing. So that was kind of the background to what sort of tasks I set myself within it. You know, I mean, we acknowledge listening to Declan there, you know, you saw how the triangle, it moves and it gets smaller and smaller getting to the top. It's a big sport, it's a major sport. It's difficult to produce these horses that are going to fit in that top piece. You know, it's not simple, and the stats certainly show that. It's not an easy job for any of you breeders that take on the challenge to meet up to that challenge of fitting into that top pinnacle. But I guess what we're saying is that, you know, even if you don't get into that very top little triangle, in aiming to get there, one is at least having the opportunity to land in the filter blocks a little bit closer to it. So I suppose first of all, just as a bit of background, I mean, we can say that the rankings, the World Breeding Federation for Sport Horse rankings, they are only including the results of the top 6 horses per stud book, but they're still significant and they're still broadcast globally, and they are a marker that you know, suggests the effectiveness of the stud book with regard to producing horses at that level, and they are certainly, you know, a marker with regard to, you know, trying to attract customers in for these horses as well. And it is very important. If you look at this particular graph that we have here at the moment, the higher the bars basically reflects the lower the position. And unfortunately, in the last results, we are at the lowest ranking in a 10-year period. Now, that's not to say that won't come back and improve again for next year. I mean, we were on an improving scale there. So, you know, but as the next graph will show you, this looks very complicated at first glance. Please don't get waylaid by that. All that I'm looking at here is looking at the total points of the horses involved in the top 6, their total points, how they have changed over the period from 2009 to 2013. And even without looking at the changes involved, we can see this group here, the KWPN, Holstein, Self-Run, and Belgian Warm Blood stud books. They're very strongly ahead of the posse. You know, when you see how much of an advance in this particular year that the KWPN even had in their overall points tally. You know, all it takes is some really big results at the top level to push that points tally up. And in fairness, you know, much as it's not maybe the most positive thing to say, that we're at the lowest rankings in 10 years. On a positive note, if we look at the points tally of the top 6 for the Irish Sport Horse Stud Book, they have been on an increase. It has come back marginally here, but that's not, you know, that's not an exceptional decline there. And I guess the other thing that sort of struck for me in this as well was looking at the Belgian SBS Stud Book, to see the level of advance and progression that they are making there, you know, and in such a short period in their points tally. So it just sort of, you know, it goes to give you a sense that, you know, it can be done as well. But it is important that we have more horses that are getting into the realm of being in a position to produce these kind of rankings, that we have more ISH competing in international classes, that we are increasing the momentum and the possibility for having the horses at this standard. So this graph here then just highlights for us the number of horses that have been in the top 200, pardon me. And we can see in 2012 that there were actually 10 in the top 200. We've actually come back down, just Castlefield Eclipse and Round Thorn Madius are contributing this year. But, you know, again, some of the horses, for example, Lisona and Kazakhstan and what have you, that have exchanged hands, and, you know, it just takes, it takes one or two to be, you know, off work or just not up to being competitive at that level, and we just have such a small number of horses competing at that high standard. I mean, if we look at it on a year by year, as far as the numbers that are present that are offering us placings at international level, and I'm not even talking exclusively metre 40 plus, I'm talking at any level internationally, there's only, roughly speaking, 100 horses in any given year that are contributing to those top 15 placings. That's a very small bunch of horses. And in any given year, per the foal crop for any given year, how that sort of translates is that you're talking less than 1% of the foal crop of any given year. So, you know, it's easy to see how when you know, there's such a small number of the really special horses, it's easy to see how things can change in that realm. Of course, we're delighted to have Greg and Clem here today, 2 gold medal holders, hip hip, well done boys. Obviously from 2010 and 2013 we're talking there, but, you know, I think people don't give enough maybe thought or kudos to how important those kind of results are for the stud book. They're super, they're fantastic. We should all be shouting about them from the high heavens. Those classes are huge, they're difficult, they're technical tracks. The horses have to be quick, they have to be, I suppose to a degree, particularly with the young ones, they're precocious in a sense, if you want to use that word. But, you know, even for horses to come through and have good results in consolation classes in Lanigan is so wonderful. But to have so many medalists in recent years, and the other placings that have stacked behind them, and even down to global being 7th in the 7-year class this year. These are super, super, super results, and we really should be very, very proud of them, and very proud of those that have put the horses forward and sent them out there and produced them and ridden them and brought these medals home. Those horses, they work hard for us in the marketing sense, because the media coverage that follows these kind of events, you know, again, they're important in the sense of keeping it in people's minds that, yeah, Ireland still can produce these horses. They are still producing these horses. So just moving on now into, I suppose, the subject of my data and what I covered or looked at or appraised in this period. I looked at international results from the period 2006 to the end of September this year, and in that there were 463 Irish sport horses. I looked also at the Premier Series from 2009 to 2013, and in that 52% of them, or 138, were Irish sport horses. I also looked at the National Grand Prix series for this year only because it was way too timely to put in the effort to going back extra years in it. And there were 156 Irish sport horses, or 63% of them were Irish sport horses in that group. I also looked at the young horse classes, as I said. There were different periods of years regarding when leagues started or the ease of availability to information. The highest number appraised were in the RDS classes, 475 in HSI and 66 in the Cavan classes. Now again, remember, there's no 4-year-olds in the HSI league, as you know. So again, as I say, there were top 15 placings that were looked at, but I would have said that the vast majority are actually in the top 10 placings. And this was for all levels of competition. But I did refine the study then to those that achieved the placings at metre 40 plus. Like I say, the majority of the horses in the study are geldings, 148 mares and 39 stallions. So when you break it down and you look at the horses that are actually competing and getting placed at metre 40 plus, it's this group here, 64% of the total that are actually in that realm. And within that, again, the majority being geldings, 87 mares and 24 stallions. And the most prominent sires in this particular group, because, you know, like I say, we're talking about horses that were bred, you know, not yesterday or the day before. The most prominent sires are Cavalier Royale and Cruising. And other than that, it's really very difficult to draw any kind of a trend from the rest. Simple as that. Looking to the breed of sires and the breed of dam sires for this particular group, for the metre 40 plus group, we can see that the largest amount of those sires is those that are of continental origin, and 32% Irish sport horse, and then smaller numbers for the draft, the thoroughbred, and the other. Now, bearing in mind that in this group of horses, the oldest dams contributing would have been born 1989. So you're talking from 1989 forward. So just to kind of keep that in the back of your head, to put it in context as to why there are such a number that are by Irish draft sires, and the continental 13%, obviously more influence here from the thoroughbred. And unfortunately, always at this point, you have a bigger proportion that it's very difficult to get any information on, that the information isn't present. Okay. Looking then to the Premier Series, and just, I suppose, to look at the buoyancy of that series and the positivity that we can draw from it. First of all, just to see that with regard to the Premier Series over the 09 to 13 period, 52% of the horses were Irish sport horses. This is 138 in total. 64% of the Premier Series just for 2013 were Irish sport horses. 54% of the top 5 placings, because I broke it down into those that came for the top 5 placing as well, 54% of those were ISH, and 63% of the National Grand Prix for 2013. So the bigger groups of horses that were appraised were for the National Grand Prix for 2013 and for the Premier Series over the longer period. Right? So when we bring that forward into this particular graph, what I'm trying to show here is that if we look at this column here, these are the horses that have achieved top 5 placing in the Premier Series. So what I'm saying is that 57% or almost 60% of those horses are actually going forward and getting the placing, the top 10, top 15 placing at metre 40 plus level. And that's in contrast to the 23% from the National Grand Prix Series. And if you take that back even to the previous slide where we're looking about the numbers of horses concerned, you're talking about, because the numbers of the international horses, it's very small anyway, you're only talking 30 and 36 respectively, but you have 30 out of 53 coming forward from the top 5 placing in Premier Series, as against 36 from 156 horses in the National Grand Prix Series. So that's really for me, that's selling that series and the buoyancy of that series with regard to equating it to the international level sport. Okay. Here I looked again, just that you can see the contrast if you bear in mind what came from the previous slide from the international horses, metre 40 plus horses. You can see here that for the Premier Series, top 5, right? The bulk of them are by continental sires, and even again when you come back into dam sires, just over half of them are by continental. And when I say continental, I use that in the broadest sense, warm blood horses, those that are imported or standing abroad. It's just a terminology, and we all get mixed up, get bogged down in terminologies at times, I think, but that's what that's referring to. And here 16% Irish sport horse and 7% Irish sport horse on the dam side. Okay, so that picture is in contrast to the other, but again, you've a younger group of animals concerned. So moving on then to the the data from the young horse classes. Pardon me. For the HSI classes, we were looking at the period from 2006 to 2013, and in this I looked at not alone the league standings, the final league standings, but also at those horses that were present in the final at Tats. Okay, there were 475 horses over the period when all duplications were removed, and 98% of which are ISH or Irish draft. And of course, we're only looking at 5 to 7 year olds in this series. From Cavan then, like I say, from the young horse classes at the Indoor Championships in September, we're looking at the 4 to 7 year olds, and the period accounted for was 2004 to 2013. Part of it, in not going back further, is access to information as well. Data included 626 horses when all duplications were removed, and of those 73% were ISH. From the RDS classes then, kudos to the RDS, it's so easy to get the information, it's there and available on the website, 2003 to 2013 for the 4 to 7 year olds. And the data includes all of the horses that went through to the RDS. For the Cavan, a little bit with time with myself as well, it was actually only the horses that were in the final class that I looked at. And 79% of those were ISH. So what did I find out? Looking here, this graph here is looking at the progression from the young horse classes to international placing, and because the years were so variable, as I said to you, in what I studied, I have other things taken from that, but what you're seeing here is that, okay, first of all, I had to take out those that were ISH, because they're the ones that I had the data on the placings with. Second of all, of course, because you're looking at them in the current, you need to ascertain the ones that have a live chance of actually having placings. So I looked at those that were 8 years or older in the year current, right? Because obviously it's not fair to be expecting placings from at that level from younger horses, right? But what is, you know, what really makes it all so, I suppose, heartbreaking is that at the end of the line, there is such a small percentage that are coming through in any of the classes that are producing results at that high level. But that's the fact for that period. So there were 13% of the horses that were ISH 8 years and older from RDS and Cavan, and 14% from the HSI classes. These are the numbers of horses concerned, right? So it's small, all right? So then I wanted to see, well, if I look at them in the sense of the top 6 comparatively for the period, was that increasing the chances of moving forward into this level of result? And indeed it does. But you know, you are talking about such small numbers here at this point. So again, you know, breaking down the number of ISH horses, the number that are 8 year olds or older, and then 19%, 29% and 26%, so 19% for Cavan. The HSI classes and the RDS classes are a nice step ahead of the outcome from Cavan for this particular study. And I also, because of the fact that I was for this using the league standings for the HSI classes, and in that, as you'll know, there are often horses that end on the same points tally. So you can have, I would have had extra horses as in top 6 for some years. So what I did was, just to make sure that there wasn't any sort of deviance in that, I went back and I looked at the final and tats, and there was 1% of a difference when I looked at it there. So for the final and tats, it was 28% as against the 29%. So very little difference there. But you know, you're looking at a smaller pool of horses that have come through for the HSI classes against the others. So that sort of bodes positively in that regard. And I suppose the other thing is to remember that you have no 4-year-olds in the HSI classes as well as against the other two. And I will come back to how it's reflecting on the ages of competitiveness when I come to later slides. Okay. So this is just looking at the two together, and it just is showing you that, you know, for sure when you move into the situation of being in the top 6 in these classes, that is definitely increasing the chances of them appearing in international meter 40 plus placing. But again, you know, it's very hard to draw absolute conclusions from these things because the numbers involved are so small. So then what I did was I pooled all of the horses together from all of those classes and omitted all duplications. And in that, we're left with just over 1,500 horses, 1,200 of whom are ISH, and the total there has been 77% of the total, 230 that are of continental origin, 29 from the Anglo-European stud book, and 2 Weatherby's non-thoroughbred. So again, of course, I had to figure out the group that were 8 years and older, that have the potential to have placing at this level. So 54% of the group were ISH and 8 years and older, and of these, you're talking about 11% attaining that degree of placing. So looking at again, remember this is a younger group of horses that we're looking at here. So the breed of sire, 57% continental, 31% ISH, and then smaller coming from the others. And for the dam sires, 23% continental, 20% ISH, a bigger group that have dam sires thoroughbred, and a bigger group that have dam sires thoroughbred, and a bigger group that have dam sires Irish draft there. And again, as always, the number that you can't actually find or that don't have pedigree information at that point is larger. So the next thing that I did then was I wanted to look and see, well, you know, was there a difference between those that were in the top 6 in the overall of all of these horses and those that weren't in the top 6 in their propensity to come out at international meter 40 plus placing. And you can see that indeed that is true. There were 218 horses in total when all duplications were removed over all the leagues that were 8 years and older ISH and in top 6, and 24% of those came forward at this level. Those not in the top 6, 622 horses with the 8 years and the ISH, and only 7% of those came forward. And then when you looked at it in the sense of those that were top 6, 8 years plus ISH, that had multiple league placings in top 6 level. Again, that increased their propensity to come out later on. But if you look at it in the overall sense of the overall totals, I guess you have the same kind of numbers of horses coming from those that are in top 6 as against those that are not in top 6. But it's just that it's increasing their possibilities, or the result of them coming out at that level. So next, and really, truly and honestly, the main reason behind me just looking at the 3-year-olds from the RDS is the ease of access to the information. For a lot of the other classes, it's just so hard to go back and find the cumulative of the entries and the results and all the rest of it. That is my probably my key reason for looking at the RDS as a group of 3-year-olds. And I just wanted to see, well, you know, for the duration of the 10-year period, you know, what was the return rate from those classes, from the entries in those classes. And I didn't even look at it in a results sense of what was first and what was 10th and where that landed, but just even in the sense of the horses that participated in these classes over the period, what percentage were coming through, first of all, into the young horse classes themselves, so moving from 3 into either 4, 5, 6 or 7, and also to look at those that were coming through at the higher realm later on. Now, of course, I kind of had to make allowances because I said to myself, well, you know, there's a certain group of horses that are not appearing out at all at 4-year-old stage. So I looked at them in the sense of the period from 2002 to 2012, but also 2002 to 2011 to allow for those that weren't coming out until that year later. And irrespective of which way I worked it, there's only 20%. Now, 20% of those that were out as 3-year-olds that even just came out in the young horse classes under saddle. So there's 80% that aren't even coming out under saddle to be even with a chance to in any of these leagues. That's not to say that they're not coming out under saddle in some other realm, or they've gone eventually, or they've done something different, but that are moving from there into being in any of these leagues or classes, or whichever way you want to phrase it. So then I looked at the ones that were 8 years and older again, and to see how many appeared out, even just in international, in the first of what I talked about, that I ignored that, you know, almost 30% of which that weren't even at metre 40 plus. And you're only talking 6 horses over that period. And what was scarier again was when I brought it back up to metre 40 plus, that we have Interpreter, Bahrain Clover, and Newmarket Venture Clover as being the only 3 that certainly that I found in my looking that were appearing out at that point. So that's kind of a little bit of a worrying, you know, it kind of begs the question for those that are, you know, chasing the 3-year-old classes to a degree, that, you know, is it the right mode to move to that next level? Maybe you know, it's that there are some that are, you know, thoughtful about how they progress with these horses and thoughtful about how they train and produce them, you know, and then there's another cohort that need to, you know, maybe revise how their approach to these classes and the number of classes that they're attending and pushing horses through, you know. But it was something that I found that quite a startling stat from it, and it would, you know, it's something that maybe can be raised in discussion later on in the day with some of our writers and producers and other panelists as to what the opinion is. So next then I looked at the progression from the 4-year-old, 5-year-old and 6-year-old classes up into higher age classes. So I decided to break down the 4-year-olds into those that were going from 4-year-olds up into 5, 6 or 7-year-olds, and those that were moving from 4-year-olds to 5-year-olds. So in the sense, these are the total number of 4-year-olds involved. So 510, 665, 5-year-olds, 480, 6-year-olds. These are the number of 4-year-olds that went from 4-year-old to older, the number that went from 4-year-old to 5-year-old, 5 to 6, and 6 to 7-year-old. And we can see that as a percentage of the total, you have 45% moving into older, you have 38% moving from 4 to 5-year-old. So there's 7% that have come out at 4-year-old that haven't appeared back out. Now, you know, it's very hard. It would need a lot more timely input into the study than what I had available to me to sort of track absolutely the horses within that. Do you know what I mean? In that there can be some horses that maybe come out and they never appear back out again, and then there's other new ones, and certainly, you know, you would say that there are probably horses that are out that don't appear out until 5-year-old at all. So but it just, as I say, this was the results as what came out of the overview, at least. I'm nearly there, Damien. So progression from the various age classes at the time of competing, those that were 8 years or older in 2013 to international meet of 40. I looked again at those that were 4, 5, 6 and 7-year-old, and certainly, as you can see here, the numbers decline. There's less in the group that are out at 4-year-old, highest number at the 5-year-old period. This is dropping back. So certainly you could say that 23% of this number is easier to achieve than of that. But this was the trend from 9% through to 23% for the various age classes in appearing out at that level. Another stat that was drawn from the review was that 5-star stallions account for 71% of the international horses, 71% of the Premier Grand Prix horses, and 68% of the young horses. And 4-star stallions account for 11% of the international, 15% of the Premier Grand Prix, and 13% of the young horses. But I suppose somebody has got to support these horses had to have been supported to get to the point where they're at. And albeit that be a strong trend that's there, I still think it's important for people to identify good young upcoming stallions too, and to give them support as well, because without support and without good mares going to them, how are they ever going to reach that echelon either? So albeit that this is an important thing to see, I just want to say it with that kind of additive to it as well. So I suppose, you don't need me to tell you, you don't need any of us up here to tell you that breeding show jumpers is very difficult. It's not easy. The stats certainly stand behind how hard it is to get into that realm. For sure, and I'm sure it's a point that will come up more throughout the day, the focus on the dam line is crucial. Whether it is a case that she actually has performed herself, but certainly the family, the dam line needs to have performance there, and it needs to be to the forefront, and it needs to be something that you as breeders pay attention to if you're producing horses for this marketplace. I guess it has been said by Declan already, and I won't harp, but husbandry, training, production, that's very important to the end point. And you as breeders and owners, you have control over a certain amount of that. You can't necessarily control the general marketplace, and you can't control, there are a lot of things that are outside of your control, but that is within your control, and you can do the best job that is possible with your horses in the early stages to make sure that they have maximum possibilities later on. And in competing young horses, be they 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, in competing these young horses, it has got to be done with care. It has got to be done with thoughtfulness. It has got to be done not just from the point of view of chasing prize money and rosettes and running from league to league. It has got to be done with the end goal in mind, and not burning out these animals too quickly.